There is a new and revolutionary biological view of man, of his prospects, and how he grows to fulfill his vast promise. This new view is expressed in 3 words, till now little known to us layfolk. The first is neoteny, the second is fetalization, and the third is paidomorphy. Neoteny means the capacity for holding on to that which is new. This means that some of the higher animals, especially man, when they are born with a new characteristic, retain it, while most of the others discard it. Fetalization is even more remarkable and more marked in man. It means that he retains, after birth, the power to go on growing, especially in his brain, in a way which all the other animals exercise only before birth, when they're in the womb or the egg. Reptiles are born ready from their hatching to begin looking after themselves. It is true that mammals other than man and the birds feed and tend their young, which are born more or less helpless. But their period of helplessness is proportionately shorter than is man's, because their brains do not continue to grow, and they are driven by their instincts to coping with their environment. Man alone is born as helpless as he is because his brain is to go on growing after he is born, and because he has no instincts. He is debarred from action for a longer time because he is to remain teachable for a longer time. And so, when he is ready to act, it is with a creative response rather than a reaction of adjustment or adaptation. Because of his long exposure in this undefended, teachable state, he is the most easily damaged of all creatures. And because of this long exposure, man is called the fetalization of the ape. For even the ape, with its large brain, second to man's, is not born as helpless and vulnerable as is the human infant. The third term, paidomorphy, applies only to man. This means that man alone of all the mammals remains young and therefore teachable the longest. For all mammals and quite a number of vertebrates have an infancy, but man alone has in addition a true childhood. Such then is the uniqueness of man. These 3 words hold the promise of 3 states of freedom denied to the other mammals. Neoteny, the first, means that because man has held on to more qualities of newness than any other creature, he is more open to new conditions. He can try out more new ways and things. He has more curiosity. He is less narrow. He is least specialized. Fetalization, the second, means that he can actually grow in brain capacity while outside the womb of his mother, when the brains of other creatures have been shut down in the helmet of their hard, tight-sutured skulls. Paidomorphy, the third, means that the unique crowning gift of man, childhood, those specific years when no longer an infant, confined to its mother's care, nor yet an adult, confined by his care for his children, his home, and his business, the child can explore the world, regardless as to whether or not it is to his advantage. Using these insights into ourselves, what do the biologists forecast for man? Rightly and naturally, they foretell that this tremendous triple development, which has raised man beyond all the other animals and has brought him to his present station, will continue. This would mean, they point out, that whereas at 2 years of age a horse, a dog, a cat, are already at the height of their full development on the plateau of maturity, present-day man remains an infant for 2½ years, and often remains pre-adolescent for 12 years. So we should assume that he is headed for a future development when infancy will last for 4 years or more, childhood from 4 to the mid-teens, and adolescence till well up into the 20s. The brain would go on growing for a greater length of time than it now does. The inquiring openness, the staunchless curiosity of childhood would be sustained for double its present span. But how can all this help solve the enigma of old age, weighted down, buried as we are by an avalanche of snowy oldsters who are as heavy as frost and as deep almost as life? Surely some long overdue and sudden spring must send these suffocating drifts down seaward in thaw floods to leave the paths and fields open for the young. Certainly this new knowledge and prophecy of growth tells against the oldsters. Even their experience, which was the one contribution a clean, cool old age could offer, is no longer wanted. Like the specialists and experts whom Henry Ford called from bitter experience, the men who tell you it can't be done. The oldsters have so often had their precedents proved wrong that they increasingly react to the new with reflex cliches. It's absurd, they say. It must fail. It's always gone wrong. What we now must have are original insights, and even more, as we discovered in our exploration of the problem of survival. If we are to grow, we must have foresight. Hindsight once could be valued, since it could show us where the train had left the tracks. But now we have to put down new tracks, or perhaps go like our jet planes without tracks. Yes, if we leave life alone and let it go on repeating itself, if we let it go on as it has gone on, while we stand by, scientifically stopping every crack through which the spark strives to escape, if we alert all our physiological skills and knowledge to make the mind smoulder out to the last sooty cinder of its drawn-out decay, then hypocrisy-hating Shaw was right. More true than he thought is his bitter saying, too old at 40. We now know that the profound and radical ideas of the truly original mind appear when that mind is in adolescence. That person generally spends the remainder of his years of originality in convincing himself that what came to him was true, and in convincing his unwilling elders that his insight was valid. So what has life produced us for, we who it is dowered with this giant brain, this organ which we still don't use to half its capacity? We can no longer doubt that such a unique instrument was grown in us in order that we might follow up and extend its design, its unfinished project. In the womb, as one of the greatest gynecologists has remarked, that which ran us, the force that was building us, knew precisely and unfailingly what to do from hour to hour. Even when we emerged as infants, if we were cared for, we grew of our own accord, and at a certain date, some 30 months, a stage almost as clearly marked as the 9 months' growth in the womb, we were ready to be psychologically weaned. In turn came childhood, puberty followed, adulthood succeeded. And in these 3 phases, the life process, by initiating us through glandular changes, was still the guide. But then something went wrong. The sure drive, the clear dictates of an inborn growth pattern guided by hormones, gave out. That is the truth about our inborn growth drive. That is as far as life, the evolutionary force in us, will take us. And if that is all the truth, then we have no future, but the ludicrously dismal picture of oldsters cramming themselves with animal glands to fend off death, trying to hang on to their appetites until life remorselessly destroys their brain cells. But it is not the whole truth. On the contrary, it is clear that because man is unfinished, he is the only animal that could live a full second life. For after he has completed his familial cycle and has seen his children themselves become parents with full-grown children, then it would be possible for him to live healthily, usefully, creatively, for as many years as he had lived from infancy to parenthood. The power that grew him by giving him a giant brain freed him from instincts, so he could reason and question and answer. And with this unprecedented endowment came the opportunity to use that reason and that intelligence. In short, man must fulfill himself. He must plan his life so that the whole span should be as purposefully designed for sustained, coordinated, directive growth as was the first part, when life grew him as it has grown all the other animals. When modern medicine was first setting out on the path which has led us to our present tremendous powers of life and death, one of the first great pioneer physicians ruled that its purpose should be the support of the enfeebled and the coercion of outrageous nature. Present-day research, such as the main findings we have already noted, has, I believe, no longer any need to regard nature, that is, the life force in man, as being apt to become outrageous and therefore in need of coercion. We can now see the life drive as a power which has prepared us to be its executive. Thus, if we take up this task of development, then we shall grow as life intended. If we refuse, then what was called outrageous nature is simply the reaction of a purpose which we have outraged. But how and to where are we to point this growth, this fulfillment of life, this full emergence of man? What would such a growth entail? Certainly life is illustrated in many ways that second steps and further advances in growth are made by great numbers of species. Again and again, when adult growth apparently gave too small a span for the creature with its first inborn equipment to express its extent of energy, or only allow it too simple a repetition, then regrowth has been granted. Whether it is the bird molting its feathers, or the insect and reptile that casts its skin, or man cutting his second teeth. And we should note that all these renewals are evidently quite strenuous and unenjoyable. Even more radical and arresting is the process or recasting forced on the insects, in order that they may not merely grow in size, but grow up into another quality of being and sustain a far more efficient way of life. The metamorphosis of the moths, and even more of the social insects, is so drastic, sends the creature through such complex reductions, and is so startlingly successful, that if we did not have it always under our eyes, we would disbelieve it. Today man has this problem set him. He must grow, or he will perish, because of the tragically fatal one-sidedness of his mind. To this challenge, your first question must naturally be, is there time? If a thunderbolt is about to fall on your head, it's really not very helpful to propose that you grow away from it. True. Not if by growth we still mean the slow process of vegetable change. However, our growth is in our minds, and this essential growth is more like those sudden jolts, those mutations whereby we know a new species suddenly appears. Remember that man's history is not just a history of a straight line ascent, a steady, intensifying and narrowing of consciousness into the critical faculty, the analytic power of taking things to pieces. That did seem to be so till lately. In fact, till this generation. But we should not have expected this straight line, extrapolated lunge, to go on to absurdity. For we did know that just as though the patterns of the spiral nebulae all living patterns are spiral too. So in this our generation, the great lunge out into the without has now curved back, and we are the first generation of self-conscious men to have become conscious of the non-self-conscious mind. The search out into the cosmos has turned into a search for ourselves. By pursuing the knowledge of what is out there, we have been brought back to seek an understanding of what is in here. What is it? Who is it that asks how and why can I see? These lead in quick turn to the further question of what is seeing and who is it that sees. Just in time we have been given the saving vision that we are not utterly alienated individuals. The tendrils of our being draw their sustenance from a vast common life. We are bound together in the infinite, invisible, but super-vital life that has produced us, made us its eyes and hands, and given us the stupendous opportunity to be a conscious part of its mind. All right, you may reply, there is time to do it. Where do we now set to work? Where, we ask, and life replies, on, out, into that big span of otherwise futile, frustrant, and baffling years that has been cleared for you, left empty for you to build on. That mind which wrought the human mind now works through it. And if the human mind will not now take up its task and go to work, it will perish through its refusal to accept this purpose that alone can contain its present powers. Very well, you say, but how? Look again at the life curve. We see that its creative period is in its rise. Till now there has been a short and steep drive upwards, followed by a quick crest, and after that a slow, shrinking descent. We have seen that life is extending the time and height of that descent. The prime of life may come to stand at 60. But what then? Surely more than just an arrested sunset. We have one analogy to help us. Indeed, it may well be more than that. As we are 9 months in the womb of the mother, so we are 900 months in this womb of the body. Is there any evidence for this 75 years being a full, fruitful, and fulfilling span? The Hebrew Psalms say that 70 years is man's lot. De Beer, one of the great living authorities on the life of the fetus and the evolution of species, in comparing man's lifespan with that of a number of other species, gives to man exactly 75 years. Does this embryo analogy help us further? Yes, and on a very important point. Not only does the fetus go through very distinct stages in the womb, growth life, just as we go through the stages of infancy, childhood, adolescence, and maturity during our body lifespan. But the most puzzling part of our lifespan, the baffling riddle of old age, the terminal period, has light thrown on it by the latest knowledge of the last stage of the embryo's womb life. We used to think that when the baby, not far off from birth, leapt in the womb, this was from exaltation. When, however, the instrument for detecting the electric currents of the brain was put on the mother's abdomen, and so could record the brain waves of the fetus, the message that was given off was not that of genial high spirits. The brain wavelength the unborn child was giving off was the delta wave, a wave that indicates a burst of almost desperate energy. Indeed, at times this wave message can mount to the specific wave of epilepsy. The child is quite healthy. It isn't an epileptic, but it certainly is far from being at ease. It is now terribly cramped and short of oxygen. The conditions are being made difficult for it. to spur it, to summon every milligram of its energy to pull itself together, to dive through the narrow gate of no return, to plunge out into the vast world where all the organs and senses it has now grown will have then to be brought into action. What then does all this analogy between pre-birth and post-birth suggest? First, the double saying of the founder of Christianity and of every profound authoritative teacher: we must die to live, we must be reborn. Yes, maybe we should and can take this on trust by analogy. Maybe this venerable statement of the seed having to die to rise again is more than analogy. But if it is true that the mind of life now proposes to work out its purpose through man and his mind, we must be as sure, as definite as we may, about what we are promised and how we should fulfill that promise. If we, following the most informed biological forecast of man, see this promise of true human progress in our extending the rising, expanding phases of our lives, right into what is now the phase of decline, what then? A society which will not face the fact of death, not even make any research into death and its meaning, behaves worse than any animal. For the animal quietly accepts a natural death. If we live on a rising curve till the age of 75, it is nonsense for society and for the human body to extrapolate physical life indefinitely. This curve need not end in a crisis, but it should be completed with a culmination. When we have full exchange between the deep mind, the mind, for instance, that we contact in profound hypnosis, that level of the mind which is called the organizer, because it controls all the body and so can cause physical changes which seem miraculous. When we can converse with this master of the body, we could learn from it our actual internal condition. It could tell us how far we have spent the stored forces we were given to spend, and when it reported that our original endowment had been expended, as we were meant to expend these resources, then we could ask it whether, now that we had served our age and generation, we must needs be caught in the shrinking husk of the body, whether we might not be released for another activity and mode of being. Right training of the mother during the 9 months which the fetus must spend in the womb can make that first birth, which is death to the life in the womb, a voluntary one. Not only this, but the mother is able to deliver the child without fear for herself and without shock or damage to the child. Why then, if we would also learn to die voluntarily, learning to cooperate with the deep consciousness in us, which can release us and which desires to do so, why then should not each of us, having ripened, achieve our second birth, that second birth, lacking which our first birth must end in a frustrant enigma? Nor need that be all. Just the relief of suffering would be immense. The negative gain that will accrue to any society which at last can produce an eldest age group that is rightly ordered, purposefully living out its full life to its last fruitful and contented day, healthy, grateful, expectant and growing, would itself make such a society outstanding, owing to the feedback of encouragement every junior group would feel at the presence of such leadership. But a very positive and particular gain also may well result. For those minds, such as this trained age group would produce, now raised above the immediacies of bodily living, such minds might well attain to a constant exercise of that faculty of precognition, which, although latent in our minds, is nevertheless inhibited in us by our physical and economic involvement with the world of means, that very faculty which today we need above all things. This, then, is how we may make our complete response to life. This is how we can answer the three profound and instant questions that confront us. To survive, we must grow. To grow, we must live a life that is directed towards and culminates in a rebirth. Certainly mankind is in labor. This is no mere clash of super-armed ideologies whose weapons can destroy the human race. This is the anguish of a super-creature who is in torment in himself as he strives to right his unbalanced mind. If, but only if, he can find a purpose equal to his powers, he will survive. Then he must find and be able to demonstrate to each one who asks both a valid warning against violence and also a valid sanction for the dedicated living that employs the apt forces of reason, persuasion, and example. And to do that, he must be able to give to each self-conscious individual a direct knowledge of his immortality. The third recording in this series is called Rebirth, and deals, therefore, with such an outline. It is an attempt to adapt in modern terms the psychological exercise whereby a person who has already been in training may recognize death as being in fact the gateway to further life, and so learn how to achieve rebirth into a higher consciousness. Critically minded man, if denied such a necessary knowledge, is incapable of the devoted and authoritative life and influence without which he cannot be trusted by all other men. Men possessed of such knowledge have the apt force, the absolute authenticity, the alternative to violence, which alone can save mankind today. And there is just time.